Hi, and welcome to Finding Your Way Through Therapy, a proud member of the Sightcraft Network. The goal of this podcast is to demystify therapy, what can happen in therapy, and the wide array of conversations you can have in and about therapy. Through personal experiences, guests will talk about therapy, their experiences with it, and how psychology and therapy are present in many places in their lives, with lots of authenticity and a touch of humor. Here is your host, Steve Bisson.
Toujours un plaisir, always a pleasure to be back. And welcome to episode 169. If you haven't listened to episode 168, it was Adrian Tiki who talked about recovery, and I hope you got to listen to that. If not, go back and listen. It was a great interview. Thought we had a great dynamic. We talked about recovery in a very honest way, which, is I think sometimes can be hard, but I truly enjoyed our conversation. But episode 169 will be with Ann Diment. She is a best-selling author and leading expert in health, safety, and recovery with over 20 years of experience in the sector. She wrote a book called Turning the Tables on Burnout. You'll find that in the show notes. And she talked about her personal journey of overcoming PTSD and mental health challenges. She is also a holistic, mindful, uses a methodology for health and safety management, and was recently diagnosed with ADD during her menopausal time. And she wants to talk about how that has really helped her in her work with herself, as well as being nice to herself, and how that's changed certain things. I think we're going to talk about childhood trauma. We're going to talk about a lot of different things. So here's the interview. GetFree.ai. Yes, you've heard me talk about it previously in other episodes, but I'm going to talk about it again because GetFree.ai is just a great service. Imagine being able to pay attention to your clients all the time instead of writing notes and making sure that the note's going to sound good and how are you going to write that note and things like that. GetFree.ai liberates you from making sure that you're writing what the client is saying, because it is keeping track of what you're saying and will create, after the end of every session, a progress note. But it goes above and beyond that. Not only does it create a progress note, it also gives you suggestions for goals, gives you even a mental status if you've asked questions around that, as well as being able to write a letter for your client to know what you talked about. So that's the great thing. It saves me time, it saves me a lot of aggravation, and it just speeds up the progress note process so well. And for $99 a month, I know that that's nothing. That's worth my time. That's worth my money. The best part of it too is that if you want to go and put in the code Steve50 when you get the service, at the checkout code is Steve50, you get $50 off your first month. And if you get a whole year, you save a whole 10% for the whole year. So again, Steve50 at checkout for GetFree.ai will give you $50 off for the first month. And like I said, get a full year, get 10% off. Get freed from writing notes, get freed from always scribbling while you're talking to a client, and just paying attention to your client so they win out, you win out, everybody wins. And I think that this is the greatest thing. And if you're up to a point where you got to change the treatment plan, well, the goals are generated for you. So getfree.ai, code Steve50 to save $50 on your first month. Well, hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 169. Just happy to have Ann Diment. Did I get it right?
You got it right.
All right, great. I hope I don't have to repeat it. As a guest, it's been, I was reading her bio, reading a lot of stuff. We just talked a little bit. Ironically, this episode coming on 9/11, which will be 23 years. I can't believe she was giving us a story about that. I want to share the story because I think that's important for people to know.
Yeah, sure. Thanks very much for having me, Steve. It's a pleasure to be here. I was visiting New York just before 9/11, and I was in the Empire State Building, and I went downtown to the Twin Towers, and I'd met some Scottish firemen, and I lived in Edinburgh at the time, so I noticed that I'd met some Scottish firemen up at the Empire State Building, and then when I went down to the Twin Towers, I noticed a local first responder, a firefighter, checking the hydrants. So I took a photograph of him, just just for my records, to show my friends when I got back home, of course. And anyway, I went back to work in Edinburgh, and in those days we had photographs developed. You had to send them off to be developed, and we were watching some. I think it was a sports tournament that was on TV. They allowed us to watch the TV at work whilst the sports tournament was on. And of course, I was showing everyone at work these photographs of my time in New York. And we watched the whole thing unfold on TV. And it was just shocking, for everyone involved. We thought it was a movie. So I've thankfully been back there to do the New York Marathon for my 40th birthday, 10 years after that. And then I went back 10 years later with my art college when I was doing my art foundation and went to see the memorial. So I think a little bit of closure there, seeing it, the memorial, the appropriate memorial that's been put in place. So yeah, that's my story.
As a newly citizenized American, we never forget.
No.
But more importantly, as a human race, I think we can't forget what that meant for a whole lot of people. So thank you for sharing,
Yeah.
and congratulations. Running a marathon is amazing. So no matter where you do it, but congratulations for that too.
Well, that actually, just to add to that, I actually walked the marathon because I was with a breast cancer charity, Walk the Walk, and it started in New York. Nina Barrow, as a protest for the treatment of women with breast cancer, and we walked in decorated bras. So we went as a team, and we walked from Staten Island to Central Park in our decorated bras. It's quite good.
Walking 26.2 miles in decorated bras is quite a sight to see. And
Yeah, it was.
well, I'm happy you did that. But I feel like we're talking a little bit, being released on 9/11. I want to make sure I made a mention out of that. But now might be more important for me to not skip any beats and ask you more about you.
Thanks, Steve. Well, my name's Ann Diment. I guess I'd say I'm a socially engaged artist, but I've used my 20 plus years working in health, safety, and well-being, and to sort of combine that to support people's resilience, really, and help them to beat burnout because of my own experiences of mental health trauma, adverse childhood experiences. The score, they can say if you have 4 or more, it significantly impacts your life. Well, I scored 9. So, and it wasn't until I was 38 that I realized I had complex PTSD. So I've spent the last 14 years, I'll give my age away there, healing, recovering, learning how to process what that meant, all the behaviors that I'd learned to survive and cope. And one of the biggest realizations was that I was working in health and safety because I didn't feel safe myself. I was trying to keep everyone else safe. So when I was 48, I said, I've had enough of this. And I went back to art college and did an art foundation, and it changed my life, basically.
Well, I can't hear more about the art college. You talked a little bit about, realizing what you did for a living was a way to stay safe because you felt unsafe. Have you ever
Yeah.
been in therapy yourself?
Yeah, I had several periods of mental ill health during my 20s. Once I'd left the home situation that was causing me the trauma, I went off to university, and then obviously it hit me once I was out of that situation. So I had a little bit of therapy when I was at university, and then other life challenges added up. Like I lost a pregnancy and mental health stress at work. So I had various talking therapies. And then when I had the CPTSD diagnosis, I was sent to cognitive behavioral therapy, and that introduced me to mindfulness and meditation, which was a journey that I've been on for over 15 years now. And then in 2018, I was introduced to emotional freedom technique tapping. I was helping a friend out who's trained as a therapist, and it had such a big impact on me that I trained as a therapist myself.
You've given me like many things I want to ask you right now, based on
Okay.
all that. But let's talk a little bit about, you talked about a little bit about work and being difficult. We can start with your child, like you talked about a childhood and how that really impacted you, and then realizing CPTSD, which is, very impactful. So how about we
Mhm.
start with maybe childhood and be a good therapist, so to speak, and I'll start off with the beginning.
Sure.
How, you talk a little bit about the impact of childhood trauma. How did that impact and you, and how did it bring you to healing and recovery where you're at today?
Well, I mean, I don't know how much detail you want to go into, but basically, my parents split. My mum left my father when I was 5, so obviously there was a separation trauma of not being with my dad. And I'll just say that I wasn't really wanted by the parent that took me. They took me because they felt like they had to. So every time they had a challenge or trouble in their next relationship, I was the emotional punch bag or physical punch bag or whatever. So when you grow up from the age of 5 to the age of 17 being not feeling like you belong, it has a big impact on you for the rest of your life, so you don't feel like you had. And obviously now I know I've got ADHD, which I was diagnosed with this year. There's that extra layer to add into it as well, thinking, well, was it my ADHD or was it the family situation? So there's a whole lot of stuff that I needed to unpack. But yeah, the it was leaving. I got kicked out when I was 17. I walked in an argument, so I had to finish school, living with a step relative, and then go to university. So it was, I used education and be doing everything I could at school, every club, every after school class, so I didn't have to go home. And I knew that's the only way I could get out there was to stay on, do everything I could at school. Just because, thankfully, when I was at that age here in the UK, we didn't have to pay university fees, so I could go to university without being reliant on them for funding.
Yeah. So it became
Yeah,
your safe zone.
yeah. It was my safe zone. School was my safe zone.
Well, and
Yeah.
it's good to have a place where you can have your own thought process, your own ideas, and then, the realization of what you've been through is probably where it really strikes you because, one of the things I've always seen in the trauma work that I've done is that you don't know it's weird until you leave and someone tells you, no, this was fucking weird.
Yeah. It's, I mean, I saw my friends' families, I saw how they functioned, when I went to visit my friends, how their parents interacted, how they treated them, how they spoke to them. And so I did know that it wasn't right, but it was such a, it was such a challenging dynamic because we didn't have a telephone at home. So the only contact with the outside world was going to the payphone up there. So that was quite isolating. I didn't have a key to get in. So if I wasn't home by a curfew, so it was very controlling. And if my mother was angry or upset and she was taken out of me, she'd send me to the phone to reverse the charges to call my fat dad to come and collect me. And he lived 200 miles away. So there was that whole rejection, abandonment type wound that happened over and over again. Um, yeah, and then there was alcohol dependency and a serious attempted murder as well. So there was quite a lot of trauma going on. So I was trauma bonded basically. I think because what else? Where else would I go?
Right. Well, that's what trauma
Yeah.
bonding is, right?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, I've learned a lot about that now. So I think that's probably why I've been so keen to understand it, so I could understand myself a lot more. And I've done a lot of reading, a lot of learning, a lot of self-help books, as well as the therapy. So yeah,
Well, I think that you talked a little bit about health and safety. I understand you wrote a book.
yeah. Turning the tables on burnout because I realised that the behaviours that I'd learned to cope with the CPTSD and the trauma were basically people pleasing, perfectionism, overworking, all the classic behaviors.
Right.
And that's why I kept burning out because I was just exhausting myself trying to please everybody and not listening to my own. Of course, it impacted more when I had a family because I was obviously worried about looking after my children and working and balancing all that as well. And yeah, it was a combination of a couple of losses, like two lots of grief within a short space of time, bullying at work because people with ADHD are more prone to bullying because of that's it's just well known that people with ADHD don't they avoid conflict too. But my additional conflict avoidance behaviours, yeah, so it was a real massive combination of things. And I had 9 months off work. I was so ill I couldn't take my kids to school, and I just thought I can't do this anymore. Something's got to change. So I had therapy, and then I realised that now I've got to break free from this cycle. So that's when I started trying to learn all these different resilience tools that I sort of call my resilience toolkit, and that's what the book talks about. It's all that.
Well, you talk about resiliency a lot because I think that
Mm,
that's important to talk about with individuals because we can't change our past. and we got to
No,
develop some resiliency in order to deal with the today, the here and now.
you have.
If you were going to talk to my audience and said to me, the one tool, the tool that really helped you the most in your resiliency, what would you say it was?
Might sound really odd, but the first thing I always teach my clients is acceptance of where you are and whatever you're feeling right now, because it's a suppression of the emotional response and a suppression of accepting that whatever's happened to you that actually causes you. It's a second dart principle I always share in my workshops. You've been wounded, but the more you go over it and say that shouldn't have happened, or they didn't, that you're wounding yourself, you're not wounding anyone else, or you're holding on to the anger. So the acceptance part is like, this is where I am. This is a line in the sand. How can I let go of the past and move forward in a more healing way?
It really sounds like acceptance and commitment therapy. If you ask me, ACT is
Oh yeah, you're more expert in that than me, Steve. I'm sorry, I don't. Yeah, that
no, but it really
I
sounds.
guess it is.
It's good. It's good because I think that's it's not weird to me, but acceptance is real. The
Hmm.
You'll heal once you accept reality. I think that it's hard for
Definitely
people to realize that, but like what happened to you is what happened to you. Whether we talk
can't
about,
change that, can you?
well, I don't mind doing talk therapy. Obviously, that's what I do for a living. But even if I
Yeah.
talked it for 20 years to you till you're blue in the face about what happened to you, if we don't get to acceptance and we don't get to, hey, this is what it is and I can't change it, what's the point? I'm a Buddhist and I like to use the Buddhist statement
Mm,
of holding on to anger is like holding on to a hot coal,
yeah.
expecting it's going to burn someone else.
Yeah.
And it's that acceptance and being able to let go after that acceptance. I don't know what you think about that, but that's certainly where I
I
go.
totally, and that's where I was coming from with the second dart thing. I mean the turning point for me was the therapist, the CBT therapist, introduced me to John Kabat-Zinn's work and the whole compassionate, compassionate mind and the whole mindfulness based stress reduction. And that once I started getting into mindfulness and understanding, and with the emotional freedom technique, understanding how your brain works. So, the tapping on the acupressure points tunes into your stress response, your amygdala, because every time you have a thought, this, I'm speaking to the audience here. Every time you have a thought, your brain doesn't distinguish between whether it's happening now or when it happened in the past. You're still releasing those stress chemicals in your body. You're still releasing that same stress response, the fight, flight, freeze, fawn. So actually, it comes to the point we think, why am I doing this? What's the point of and talk therapy for me? Bessel van der Kolk in his, my body keeps score work. That's why I like EFT, because it's all stored in the body if you don't have a right way of releasing it. So I explored a lot of it in my art degree, actually, my art program, because I was trying to use creativity for well-being, and I really listened a lot to Bessel van der Kolk and all those sort of somatic, mindful mind-body connection therapists, and um, expressed so much of the trauma and released it through the creative process.
Yeah, and I think the creative process is a release for so many people. And you talk about
Mm,
tapping, you talk about your hand. I like this area of
the sore spot here, yeah, yeah.
so a lot of people talk about. I'm a big fan of that stuff. Has tapping become something that you do regularly, or where are you at with the tapping in general?
Yeah, I describe it as a dimmer switch for your emotional response. So if you're depending on obviously how your nervous system's set, like your set point of your nervous system and how you get triggered, the stress triggers. I call it taming your stress triggers. You can when you tap on, even if you tap on the side of your hand or the side of your fingers, or you can do it discreetly without people seeing it, so you don't have to do the whole facial thing. But um, like if I'm in a car or something with somebody and I'm anxious about their driving, I'll
Right.
just tap, or before I'm talking, I'll tap. And it just tunes down that amygdala response and gives you that pause to say, is this still same stress as it was the original first time? So if you're public speaking or whatever, it's like, okay, I was anxious about that before, but I'm anxious about it now. And it gives you that pause to sort of choose how you respond.
Yeah. I'm
Yeah.
For me, it's the tug of the ear, which I'm wearing my
Oh,
my,
is that
my
an NLP thing?
Yeah, so I like the
Yeah,
tug of the ear. It's a little, it's subtle, but it is something that
yeah.
helps me calm down. So for those of you on YouTube, you're going to be looking for me and Ann to do some of those things right now. But
Okay. Yeah, I'm tapping my hand here.
yeah,
Well, actually, this chair that I'm sitting in, I don't know if you can see I'm on YouTube. I'm sitting in this rocking chair, and this is one of my projects that actually was such a healing process for me in my art project because it was about then and now. And I found this poem called "Forget the Past," and I can't remember the poet, but Steve somebody, and it was about the past is a series of mental mirrors that you filter through and that. So I wrote my own response poem to that. So poetry is a big outlet for me for to process my trauma and my emotions. And this chair I'm sitting on, the seat is the present. So I've done a lotus flower motif on the seat cushion, and the back panel, which obviously you can't see because I'm sitting on it, is in 5 sections, one for every decade of my life. And I've chosen elements on each cushion, each panel to represent events in those 5 decades. So by creating this chair, I sit in the present and I rock back to the past. And that for me was 3 months of stitching, choosing photographs, creating this piece, and it sits in my room. And it's one of the most healing things I've ever done.
so art plays a big factor for you and being able to
Yeah.
express yourself in your art. One of the things that I talk about with trauma is finding also these outlets for yourself to do.
Mm-hmm.
Is that is that an outlet that you discuss with people in regards to like being creative, whether it's writing, whether it is stitching, whether it's dancing? Right? I really don't mind what people do, but is that something that you talk about with other people because that is part of the healing process, in my opinion?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I run Create and Calm workshops online. They're bookable via Eventbrite, which I take people through just basic. And I also run in-person workshops. And I did host a podcast called Creating Resilience, where I talked to people about how creativity supported them being more resilient. And the way I describe it, because I train health coaches here in the UK, so to train people to have personalized health conversations, to talk to them about what matters to them. And we talk about the three brain model, which is obviously I know is a simplified model, but you've got your survival brain, which is nothing gets past that if it's going to threaten you at all. So that's your stress response. And you've got your emotional part of your brain, which is your responses to any threats or whatever. And then you've got your prefrontal cortex, which is your thinking and problem solving brain, but that's also the creative brain. So I explain to people that if you're being creative in whatever form, you know, makes you relax, whatever form you enjoy doing, whether it's poetry, music, art, drawing, dancing, or whatever. If you're being creative and in flow, your brain is by definition calm, and so it's it's a really simple way to say, look, being creative calms you, but also you are calm after being creative. So that's how I explain it to people.
Yeah, and I think that being able to, I tell people about incompatibility. If you're
Mm,
really struggling with something and think about a child's laughter, for example, and
yeah.
that genuine child laughter, and people usually smile when I say that. And I'm like,
Hmm.
see, we created an incompatible thought about what you were like reprocessing from your thoughts in the past or trying to fix it or what have you. So I like it, call it distraction, call it redirecting, call it whatever people like to feel. But I remind them like that's being creative and being able to think about different things. Like to me, I have like as my kids laugh at me is there's like three reels that they put on my phone that when I really want to laugh, I just watch it and then I start laughing
Oh, yeah.
hysterically. And it seems silly, but it really definitely move me from my primitive brain, as I call it, to more of my cerebral cortex and be like, oh, okay, I can feel good. It's okay. It's past. I'm safe now.
Yeah, well, laughter yoga is a whole thing, isn't it? I mean, have you ever tried laughter yoga? That's amazing. I mean, you can stand there feeling really uncomfortable in a circle with people, and just the act of faking a smile
Right.
starts releasing those happy hormones because your brain, again, doesn't know the difference. If it sees those muscles are activated in your face for a smile, it'll
Right.
still release the same chemicals, won't it? So it's a very complex thing, our brains, but actually it's also on the fundamental level very simple. It's the same stimulus that's going in. It doesn't gauge time or genuineness, does it? Because if you're smiling, even if you didn't mean it or not, you still get that effect.
Well, I think that laughter is the best medicine. It's the best
Hmm.
therapy. Part of the work I've done talking about, how to overcome the impact of any type of trauma. I tell people like laughter is the key. And in therapy,
Mhm.
I a little bit like this podcast, I go from, being fairly serious to making silly jokes. And
Yeah.
the reason why is that you actually internalize whatever you learn a lot faster if you're smiling and laughing.
Yeah. Because you're in that creative problem solving part of your brain.
So I definitely relate to that. And, tapping helps. People always think it's funny to do tapping when they first start. But once they get into it and they're like, hey, this really works. I'm like, yeah, I'm a Reiki practitioner. So believe me, I know other stuff that works on that level.
Well, it's interesting actually because obviously tapping can work on many levels, and you can do yourself, you tap on yourself, which is the calming thing. But if you're working with a therapist, like when I work with clients, when I'm doing EFT therapy with them, because I do also offer EFT therapy sessions, we can do the tapping, like basically repeating what they've said or work using the client's words and working through. But what I love about it is so creative and so imaginative because we can use so many techniques. We can use the movie technique, so we can separate them from it. We can do parts work. We can take them back to their inner child. And what I love, one of my favorite things I love doing is the writing on the walls exercise, which is like Gary Craig originally did that. And I take the clients to imagine them to be in a space where they feel happy and talking about their beliefs that are, they're put there mostly before the age of 7 by other people. So the beliefs about themselves. And that's the writing on their walls. And we talk about palace of possibilities. So we mostly stay in one room confined by these beliefs about ourselves. And there's such creativity and imagination when they bring in their favorite pet or they bring in their younger self or they bring in somebody else they want to help them clear these old beliefs. And then they just go to town with all sorts of wonderful ways of clearing and redecorating this room the way they want it. And then go through the door and leave the room. And that creative process of clearing sometimes decades of trauma just with a simple creative exercise is so magical. And they do that obviously while they're tapping. And it's amazing.
I mean, you don't need to sell me on the impact of tapping. I definitely know that it brings personal transformation, not only in a creative
Mm,
level, but like you mentioned so nicely, it takes away those emotional blocks, right? I mean, that's my
yeah,
experience anyway.
yeah, yeah. And I think that's probably why I was drawn to it because of the creative nature of it. Because the physical act of tapping is one thing, but it's how you ask the questions or how you can go off in a complete rabbit hole. And maybe that's why I like it because my ADHD brain just loves the sort of flitting from one thing to the next.
Yeah, well, I think that we're all getting close to that in general. I think that with
Yeah.
our the whole phone, social media aspect of everyone now, we need this creative outlet. We need to redirect ourselves, and we have trouble sometimes focusing. So finding that one thing you can focus on is so important.
Well, that's the thing with the rise of AI now, isn't it? Because people there's one I'm not saying it's bad, but what I'm saying is there is one thought stream saying that actually it's removing our creative thinking process as well because you don't have to think for yourself. You just put a question in, and this sea of information will come out and do things for you, which can be helpful to organize your thoughts. But on the other hand, we're already lost our attention span, but as our creativity going to be stifled by it as well.
No, I would argue that our creativity has been stifled with phones because we let other people be creative and guide us.
Yeah,
I mean, in the in the spirit of the political system we're in now in the United States of America, you get the feed of the people you agree with. You don't get a counterproductive point of view or being able to be critical thinkers. And for me, that's important to look at the world critically, not only the world, but even yourself and your own actions. Not critical, oh, you're bad, but critical and like, is my point of view valid? Why is it valid by only a certain people? Why can we see it from another point of view? And I think that that's a
yeah.
lot of the stuff that we're missing out on nowadays to be able to solve our trauma, not supporting saying, oh, look, I want a trauma bond with my abuser, but also understand other points of view is very important.
It is, and that's one of the things we do in the health coach training is we're trying to shift mindsets in both the medical professionals who are talking to the patients, but also in the patients because for years they've been asked what's the matter with you, but actually the conversation we direct is what matters to you. And it's a real mindset shift because people have been used to going and seeing a medical professionals and therapists and expecting to be fixed, but they don't realize they've got such a big responsibility for managing their own health and well-being. And unequally, the therapists and professionals think they're the experts and they know better than the patient. But actually, the patient knows themselves far better than obviously they've got a lot of medical knowledge or knowledge in their field, but the patient knows themselves and their needs best. So it's that changing of mindset on both sides. So one of the creative things I do in my creative wellbeing workshops is a simple mindful breathing exercise of drawing around your hands. So you like breathe in as you go up, breathe out as you go down, and do that so that you're calming the nervous system down, touching the acupressure points. So we get our hand. That takes away the fear of the blank page because they've done a hand drawing, but also they've calmed their nervous system down, they've slowed their breathing down, and then they can write 5 things that matter to them. And that is such a brilliant exercise to do because it gets them thinking, actually, what does matter to me? And then it gets them thinking about what's really important to them. But yeah, that's the mindset shift in the health care that I train, is getting people to think, actually, I have responsibility for my own health and well-being. You know, I'm not expecting you to fix me. I'm expecting you to support me in this recovery journey.
Well, you know, I can also imagine just even touching your hand has some sort of
Yeah.
therapeutic effect too. So
Yeah. It's a brilliant exercise. And one of the other creative things to do is well, music. I'm a percussionist and I play washboard, and I have
okay.
these gloves. I have these gloves with thimbles on the end, and I realised the reason I like playing washboard is because of it's literally stimulating all acupressure points.
Well, I didn't know
Yeah.
you were from Kentucky, but you hide the accent really well.
I have a Zydeco. I have an original Zydeco washboard, actually one of the over shoulder ones. Yeah.
Oh wow, really?
Yeah.
Well, you know, I think that the other part too is you talked about taking responsibility. It's a common theme that I actually had a recent podcast interview where I talked about, like, they talked about the magic bullet, and I joked around, well, you know, you're from Florida. We don't use bullets in the Northeast. I call it the magic wand.
Oh
Um,
yeah.
and she laughed, obviously. But to me, that's the other part too, is that I have a lot of people who come in and like fix me. I'm like, oh,
Yeah.
let me get the magic wand. I'm like, no, I can't
Yeah.
fix anyone. And you know, a common message in finding your way through therapy too that I like to remind people is that no one. You know, I've seen over 10,000 people in my career. I have
Hmm.
fixed 0 people.
Yeah.
I've given tools and assets and ways to deal with it for people so they can feel better and practice it in their own lives. But I've never fixed a human being in my career.
We see that's the problem, and I think some part of it is in the marketing, especially for therapists. They market saying, I will help you transform in XYZ, or this will transform you. But nothing will transform you unless you put the work in. You can have the tools, and you can have the support and the peer support and the sort of accountability to do it. But you know, even in coaching, a coach is only there to guide the person. They're not there to tell the person what to do, whatever. You know, we talk about directive and non-directive conversation skills. Well, you're not telling the person what to do because they're not going to do it if they don't want to. They
Right.
have to want to change or have to want to do the thing. You know, you could nobody can fix somebody, can they? They can give them the tools and the support and the therapy, but they can't actually. You know, the person has to do the work as well.
Well, I would also argue that I don't know about you, but are you fixed? Because I still am working on
Oh
myself.
no, and then actually that's implying that we're broken. You know, well, we're not broken. We're just parts of us maybe need some healing, but you know, nobody's ever perfect, are they?
Well, except for me, but thank you for noticing.
I'm modest too. Yeah.
No, I appreciate that. And I think that it might be important. You know, you talked about, you know, you got diagnosed recently in
Hmm.
June, so only a few months ago, with
Yeah,
ADHD.
yeah.
And I think
Yeah.
that there's so many aspects. I think that adult ADHD and being diagnosed with that at a later stage in your life, and I mean later as in 30 plus, because you live with it for
Mhm.
30 years and you're like, oh, now it explains a lot.
Yeah.
How has it impacted your life?
Oh, massively. I mean, you know, obviously, I've already told you my age, so I've got menopause to think about as well.
Yeah.
So just persuading my doctor to actually allow me to go on the waiting list to get assessed was a challenge. So when you're already doubting yourself and you have imposter syndrome about, well, what am I, aren't I? What's going on? And you've been through menopause and you just think you're crazy anyway, because most women don't realize they've been through menopause until they're through the other side. So it's like 4 or 5 lives of their years of their life when they're thinking, what's happening to me?
Yeah.
And there's so little understanding about menopause in our medical system. I don't know about the American system, but it's just shockingly inadequate. So, yeah, you're already doubting yourself, thinking, what's going on? And most of the women I know who have been diagnosed late in life have realized after they've tried to get support for their children. So that was my experience as well. I was trying to get support for my daughter at school and went through all the tests with her and recognized so much of it in myself. Thought, hold on a minute, that's kind of So you've already been through the process for like 3 or 4 years before you actually get to be assessed. Thankfully, I only had to wait 11 months for my assessment. And the first thing the psychiatrist said to me was, I have to apologise that you've had to wait this long for this assessment, because it's the most easily supported and treatable things you can have. And he actually apologised to me that I'd had to wait till I was 52 to be diagnosed.
Well, you are in the UK and socialized
Mm,
medicine. I grew up in socialized medicine in Canada. The assessments here can be a little easier to find and a little quicker, but at a
yeah,
price. Where when you're
yeah,
in
definitely.
socialized medicine, I mean, the wait list in Canada is outrageous. Also,
Hmm.
never mind for mental health, any type of physical health and diagnosing and stuff like that. So I get it, and I know the UK is the same. And I think
Yeah,
menopause,
definitely.
the menopause part is very important too, because I've had a few guests on that talk about perimenopause, postmenopause, menopause, and how it changes a woman's. They think it's just the body. No, it changes your mind. Thinks it pot process, it changes so many things. So I think
It
it's
definitely
very
does.
underestimated the effect on women what menopause and all those menopausal symptomology can do. So I'm happy you got that diagnosis.
Yeah, and what I've learned, because the only way this is, well, you talk about socialized medicine. The only way I could get support after my diagnosis, because the healthcare system is such a huge waiting list, because more people now, because it's only in 2019, I think, maybe, yeah, 2019, that the UK National Health Service recognised that adults could have ADHD, so adult ADHD. So it's only been the last 5 to 6 years, right? And obviously, all the research and testing, like with most pharmaceuticals, has been done on white males or men. So there's very, very limited understanding of the hormonal cycle impact on ADHD symptoms. And that's why they recognise now that ADHD symptoms are more prevalent when estrogen levels drop. So puberty and menopause are the 2 points in a woman and a girl's life where the ADHD is more prevalent. But if it's not recognized, because women and girls show symptoms differently to men and boys, they internalize a lot. So there's a whole lost generation of, it's a gender issue. I'm very passionate about this. So there's a whole generation of women and girls who have been misdiagnosed with eating disorders, with mental health issues, because they haven't recognized the ADHD symptoms in them. So the only way I could get support was to pay to train as an ADHD practitioner. And that 14-week training course that I went through helped me process as I learned about what ADHD means and how it shows up. So
Well,
yeah, I paid for a 14-week training. So I'm now an ADHD practitioner as well.
well, that's good. And 2019, I'm like, oh my God, yeah, an international community really has to catch up.
Yeah.
But I think that you made a lot of good points here. One of the things being the testing has been done on predominantly white males. And then, young girls, I'm actually a child specialist. I don't work with children anymore because I can't stand the
Mm.
parents. I've been very open about this. But the one thing that I realized is I had people who would bring their young, their teenage girls, and they'd tell me, "Oh, they're defiant, they're oppositional defiant, or they're
Yeah,
bipolar,"
yeah, yeah.
and I'm like, "What about their fucking hormones are just out of whack?"
Hmm.
And most people would be like, you can't diagnose that. You're not a doctor." And I'm like, I don't have to be a doctor to use logic, though.
Yeah, yeah. And rejection sensitivity dysphoria, all those things would affect
Right.
people's um ability to form friendships, ability to get on with relatives. And because it's highly heritable, it's highly likely their parents have it too. So the guidelines in the UK, which don't get implemented, obviously, because who's holding to account. But the national sorry, I'm a bit cynical about this. The National Institute of Clinical Excellence, which is they give guidance to the UK medical professionals. They said that if somebody gets gets a diagnosis of ADHD, their family should also get emotional coaching or support to impact, and their family should as well, because if you're a child and you're diagnosed with ADHD, obviously the parents should be screened, or there should be parental advice given, and vice versa. If a parent is diagnosed, well, there's a whole load of guilt and shame about how you parented without realizing didn't have ADHD and all that sort of thing. So yeah, it's quite a big can of worms there.
I mean, it changes how, the emotional impact that we have, because sometimes, again, I'm not a woman, so I'm not going to pretend I am, but how it affects you emotionally and the impact it has on you because you think you're crazy, you think you're going
Mm-hmm.
crazy or whatever. I mean, that just changes everything when there's a diagnosis such as ADHD or ADD that can play a factor in how you're feeling in regards to your menopause, your perimenopause, your postmenopausal stuff.
Yes, but actually, I had the reverse of that, because I've the last 30 years I've been told I was crazy. I've been told, oh, you're mentally ill, or you're depressed, or you're anxious. But actually, that was the final piece of the jigsaw. And I thought, no, I'm not. I'm okay. I just got ADHD.
Right.
So actually, that was the acceptance part. So this year has been the first year I've fully accepted myself for the first time in my life, and it's been brilliant.
Wow. No,
But the problem is, the people who've been calling me crazy for the last 30 years, they they don't know how to deal with it. So I kind of have to let them go.
well, I need to. I know you said you accepted yourself. You need to talk to me offline here because that's the best thing in the world. Accepting oneself, I think, is the hardest thing we could ever do.
That's Carl Jung, isn't it? Yeah.
It is a Jungian belief system, yes, but I
Yeah,
do,
I
I do,
I I
yeah.
quoted him in my book. Yeah.
Well, and the other part too is, I'll tell you my view of craziness, and you can correct me if you think I'm a little out there, and I'm fine being out there. Like, we're all crazy. We're all crazy differently, but we're all crazy. And it's really accepting where your crazy's at. If you need some support, if you need some help, or if you can do it on your own, or you can do it with therapy or a group, but ultimately realizing that we all have a little side like that. It's not that we're crazy. We're just not fitting into anybody's box and they get pissed off about it.
Yeah, well, you see, I'm understanding, I'm unpacking the whole neurodiverse, neurotypical versus neurotypical thing. And there's an argument that actually, the term ADD or ADHD, the disorder bit, actually is probably shouldn't be in the DSM really, because the diagnostic manual, because it's not a mental health disorder. It's just a spectrum of how our brains function. I just because our brains process dopamine and other neurotransmitters differently. So it's an interesting debate, and there's a whole load. I mean, obviously, you sort of get involved in all the different groups, then, don't you? But it's a different debate about, is it an illness? It's not an illness. It's just a different developmental condition, isn't it?
And I think that that's where we need to move also in the mental health realm, in my opinion, is that they're conditions, you know?
It's a difference. It's just a difference, and we're all different. Nobody's the same. Even twins aren't the same, are they? I mean, they've still got slight differences.
Yeah. And I recommend anyone who wants to go look at twin studies where they separated at birth, they'll show you that, your environment impacts you as much as your genetics.
Yeah.
Um, But yeah, no, I think that it's absolutely true that, if when I tell people, like, what my biggest pet peeve is when people say I'm ADHD or I'm bipolar or
Hmm.
I'm depressed. No, you're not. You have that condition. You
It's like
happen to,
I'm toenails or I'm fingernails, isn't it? You have fingernails, but you're not fingernails.
yeah, I mean that's the bottom line. I think that when we have, you can call it a disorder if you wish, and condition I like better. I think I'm going to start stealing that from you because it really is a condition. Like I grew up with my own trauma. I have my trauma from my work, but it's not who I am. I'm not Mr. PTSD. I just happen to be a therapist, a human being who's a father, who's a boyfriend, who's a son, who's a friend, who's a neighbor, who happens to have some sort of post-traumatic stress disorder in my life. So
Yeah,
I like to change that view for people. We're not our disorders or our conditions.
yeah, and that goes hand in hand with how you validate yourself, isn't it? Because you don't validate yourself by your bank account or how much you're earning or what job you are or what people think of you. You know, you have to internally validate yourself as yourself. And that was the one thing that you talked about, the emotional impact. That was the one thing that I've had to, well, I'm still coming to terms with is who am I?
Hmm.
Because I've had this identity for the last, well, at least the last 15, 16 years is, oh, I'm a trauma survivor or I'm this or I'm that. But I've got to see all that through a different lens now and say, oh, okay, well, I can understand why that happened, but I didn't know. And the resources I had at the time, I felt like that. But actually, I completely understand now. And it's a whole new shedding of, stuff that the story, it's retelling your story basically. So the good thing is I've got another book in me now because I've got to rewrite the whole book that I published last year through a neurodiverse lens. Keep me busy.
Well, I'm going to definitely link the book into the show notes. The other thing I want to really link in the show notes is your 6 week coaching and recovery program that you talked about. Can you tell me more about
Hmm.
it?
Well, yeah, it's kind of it's the development because I was in my old, before I did the whole ADHD diagnosis, I was a stress and resilience coach, and I did a resilience reset type coaching program where I took people through a burnout recovery journey to try and help them understand the behaviors that will lead them to burnout. So really, the resilience reset is supporting. I'm really focused on neurodivergent women because that's my passion now is to get women to understand the many barriers and inequalities they face in their life and neurodivergent women. That's an extra one. It's basically a 3 month, a 6 week, sorry, a 6 week process where we have coaching calls and I share tools and I give you WhatsApp support over the 6 weeks to help you start thinking, you know, where am I now? What's got me to the stage where I am and where do I want to be, basically.
Well, I'm going to definitely put that in the show notes. I think that's a great idea. And with the coaching for over 6 weeks and talking to someone is important because
Hmm.
it can be a lonely process, if you ask me.
Oh, so isolating. Yeah, really isolating because you say you don't know who you are and you've all the things you believed about yourself and the people around you have believed about you just have to be unpicked and reframed, basically.
And I can't remember who said this, but everything you know about yourself is wrong.
Yeah,
That's
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 good. That's good.
basically what you're being told.
Yeah, and say our brains, like Carol Dweck's work on mindset and growth and all the different mindsets. Uh, our brains just constantly renewing ourselves and constantly malleable and shaped by our environment so much that actually we can be anything we want to be. We just have to believe it and actually support ourselves to shed anything that's stopping us from doing it and just go and do it.
And I think that that's the important part is just do it. Um,
Mm.
in my office, in my this is my studio, so to speak, but my office, there's a sign that says "Do or do not." There is no try. I know I stole it from Yoda, but nonetheless, I think that that's the important part is just doing it and getting in that direction. So having a coach, having someone to guide you is so much more helpful.
Yeah, and I think the key thing about having a coach is they can ask you the awkward questions that you might not ask yourself because you feel uncomfortable about them. So they can help you reflect in a safe space without, and work through that fear. One of the best tools that I use with the health coaches and with my coaching clients is the ambivalence grid because it takes the fear out of, well, if I do it, what will happen? If you do it, what won't happen? If I don't do it, what will happen? If I don't do it, what will happen? And just taking that fear out of any things, well, it helps you to do it in a safe space. And yeah, you wouldn't do that for yourself, really. You'd sort of stay in your comfort zone, wouldn't you?
Right. Well, what I usually say to people too is if you know that thought in your head that you've never said out loud, say it out loud. And when they do say it out loud, I'm like, oh, that sounds ridiculous when I say it. I'm like, yeah, because it stayed stuck in your brain all this time. So it sounded
Yeah,
logical until you said it out loud. So I'm happy that you
yeah.
did. So sometimes it's getting out that takes that ambivalence and clears it up for you.
And if you tap while you're doing it, you're nice and calm. So
See, you're just putting a nice bow on our whole conversation.
yeah.
Um, I'm going to obviously link all this stuff, but how do people reach you?
I'm on Instagram at Resilience Rebel. On Instagram, I'm on LinkedIn at Ann Diment Changemaker, and I've also got a Resilience Rebel page, which I don't put very much on. I'm saying it's quite new, and I've got my website, resiliencerebel.com.
Great website. That's how I linked up with Ann. I looked it up. But Ann Diment, thank you so
Got it
much.
right.
See,
Thank you.
I practice a lot. I'll remember it.
Yeah.
I also put it in a how I would pronounce it right here, so that way I said it right. Thank you so
Keep the
much
secrets
for your
away now.
time. And on just a personal note, I thank you more than you'll ever know. So thank you for that. And hopefully people will go and follow you and go do the coaching stuff with you.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure and honor to talk to you, Steve. Thank you.
Well, this concludes episode 169. Thank you so much, Ann. I really appreciate it. Go and do a recovery program. Go reach out to everything that you can, including her book and her former podcast. If I can find it, it should be in the show notes. But in episode 170, we're going to meet with Sarah Waite. And I can't wait for you to talk to her, but that's the next episode, and I hope to see you then.
Please like, subscribe, and follow this podcast on your favorite platform. A glowing review is always helpful. And as a reminder, this podcast is for informational, educational, and entertainment purposes only. If you're struggling with a mental health or substance abuse issue, please reach out to a professional counselor for consultation. If you are in a mental health crisis, call 988 for assistance. This number is available in the United States and Canada.